So welcome to May 2018 Brandcasting Client Call. Tracy's off at a talk up in LA, so it's just me today. There's a chance she might join us, but I'll be kind of surprised. So let's take a deep dive into iTunes. I don't know how many of you have been told, and I might have actually said it to you in the past, but have been told that during the first 8 weeks that your podcast is launched, that you have this opportunity to get featured in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It's sort of the same thing, new and noteworthy section. And that used to be the case, but it has changed. And it used to be if you went, and you had to do this from either the app on your phone or in the desktop app of iTunes. It doesn't matter if you're on a Mac or a PC, but in the desktop app of iTunes under podcasts, there's this new and noteworthy section. And the way it's displayed to you, there's this bar at the top and it scrolls a bit, and there's maybe a couple dozen podcasts shown there, and then you can hit view all. And if you view all, what used to happen is it was this long tiled list of all the cover arts of every podcast in this new noteworthy section, and it was almost exclusively new podcasts that are 8 weeks old or less. And when we first launched our first podcast, it's like 5 years ago now, we went in there on a daily basis to check it out and see, hey, where are we? And we would see ourselves rising in the rank, as we got more downloads and subscribers. And now that's all gone. I mean, there were like 1,500 to 2,000 podcasts at any given time on that new and noteworthy section. This is general, not in a specific category, but across everything. And that no longer exists. There's now about 24 or 25 total podcasts in their new and noteworthy section that's in general for the entire site. And then if you go view a certain category, let's say you want to look at a business podcast, you go and click on the business section. There is a new and noteworthy for the business section. Again, it has anywhere from 23 to 26 podcasts in there. And so I was curious as to why this changed. So I did some research and I reached out to a few other companies. Some of them are consultants that actually pitch a concierge service that if you want your podcast to be on the new and noteworthy, they know how to get you there. Well, it used to be a lot easier than it is now. They all admit they don't know the exact formula for how to do it. They don't know exactly what iTunes is doing, but they know that a general marketing campaign, a serious high-end marketing campaign that's costly, is what it takes to get there. And so some of them believe that. I have to tell you, I don't know that I completely believe that. I don't know that there is a specific formula to get you there. And I don't really have a lot of faith in these companies that say, if you pay them a large amount of money, and I'm talking like a 5-figure amount of money, that they can get you in that new and noteworthy. And I'm going to tell you why in a minute, because I have some anecdotal evidence that suggests otherwise. There's also been a lot of reports written in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal over the last few years, how there is one person at Apple who's the gatekeeper at iTunes of who can get featured on new and noteworthy, or you see in those paid advertised spots in the banner at the very top where they're promoting certain podcasts. I think today I saw Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, up there. Those are definitely paid spots. And I think new and noteworthy also may not be always a paid thing with Apple, but I think there are people at Apple that just have decided for whatever reason, there's a few podcasts they think deserve to be in new and noteworthy, and they allow them to be there. I don't know that there's any specific algorithm or metrics that can get you there. But I'll tell you first what I definitely know is true, and then I'm going to come back to this new and noteworthy because it's with some interesting evidence, and that is that there's another way you can look at the podcast in a certain category. Let's say I stay in the business category for a second. You go into iTunes, you click on the business category, and on the sidebar there on the right side that has top podcasts. And if you click on top podcasts, it will bring up a list of the top 200 podcasts in any category and any subcategory. So if you're in business investing, you can go look at that one too. And those top 200 podcasts in every category, that I'm quite certain is actually a result of the number of downloads that podcasts are getting over periods of time, as well as other indicators that they look at, the number of subscribers a podcast has, which iTunes will never tell you how many you have. That's unfortunate, but they know. And they'll also do it not only based on how many subscribers, how many downloads. There's one more piece of criteria. Oh, how many reviews? Of course, that's the other one. How many reviews you get within in total, and how many reviews you've had lately, and how good those reviews are. So iTunes has their own algorithm and how they analyze all that and determine what the top 200 podcasts are in any category. And I'm happy to say there are actually lots of Brandcasters customers that are up in there, most notably in the general business marketing and management category. Business Builders Rockstar Show, called BBR for short, Business Builders Rockstar Show by Nicole Holland. She's a Brandcasting client, and she's up in there. I think last I checked, around 146 out of 200. We have a general real estate investment podcast called Passive Real Estate Investing by Marco Santarelli. He's about number 25 in business investing category. His podcast is up there. And I know both of these podcasts are not, Alexandra, Deanna Clarence is having trouble logging into Zoom for this call. Can you text her, check with her and help her get on it here? Sorry for the interruption, guys. Another person's trying to log in and is not able to. Anyway, so I know that both of these Brandcasting clients are not doing any paid marketing other than working with us to produce their shows and their blog posts. They're not doing any one of these programs that's gotten them up there. So their rankings are organic, and I'm really happy to see that, because it's proving that the formula works. Business Builders Rockstar Show gets, I think, around 2,000 to 3,000 downloads a month. It's not a whole lot. So it's not just about downloads, but Marco Santarelli's Passive Real Estate Investing gets well over 10,000 downloads per episode. So that makes sense that I think that business investing category is really competitive. So some are less competitive than others. Now, here's where I want to get to what's been sort of the mystery to me of this new and noteworthy section, is that one of those same shows, the business building rockstar show, Nicole Holland, her podcast, if you go into iTunes, even, as we're on this call, if you go into iTunes and you look in the business category, click on the business category and look at their new and noteworthy, her podcast has been in that new and noteworthy section for more than 2 years straight, and she has no idea why. She has not paid anyone anything to get there. She hasn't done anything out of the ordinary. I think she's got a great show, no question. I think it's got a cool name, and I think her cover art looks cool. She's got sort of purple dyed hair, which is a little unusual, that you see there. We really don't know what of any of those factors is playing a role in that, but she's been there for more than 2 years, and now there's really only, I think, 23 or 24. And it's weird, there's not the same number of podcasts in new and noteworthy in every category. I've seen it ranging from about 23 to 26 podcasts now that are listed there, and hers has been there consistently. So the only thing I can think of is someone at iTunes who's in charge of this likes her show, and they're keeping it there. I mean, I can't imagine it's because it's not new anymore. And I mean, it's a great podcast, but what makes it particularly noteworthy? I'm not knocking her podcast in any way. It's a good quality show, but it just doesn't make sense it would be there for 2 years straight. And I even had another call this morning from a high-level consultant that does serious high-level concierge marketing program for podcasters and big-time authors. And this is expensive stuff. I mean, you're definitely in, at least $25,000 to $50,000 territory just to market and get up there, but still sells and actually guarantees her clients that she can get you in new and noteworthy. And I was like, well, how do you guarantee this? Like, well, everything that we do to market the shows and get it out there, even though we don't know, she admits we don't know exactly what's working, but it's happened with every show that it's gotten in there. And they offer a money back guarantee. And when that guarantee is over, if if a show doesn't get into that new Noteworthy, she'll refund a portion of their fee, but she's never had to do it. So more power to her, but she really doesn't even know exactly what she's doing that's working there. So anyway, so some of this, I think it's always going to change, right? I mean, I think we all know, even though we all learned some things about podcasting early on and best practices to get our shows known and up as high in the rankings as possible. And the biggest one has to do with content. Everybody that is selling a service to get shows ranked high in iTunes or to try and be in that new and noteworthy section is saying you've got to do one show a weekday rather, 5 shows a week, and producing that level of content to be able to get there. If you don't do that, then your chances are slim at getting there. And then again, Nicole Holland's Business Builders Rockstar show defies the odds on that because she's doing one a week. So why is she still in the new noteworthy? It's an anomaly, or I guess a mystery maybe is a better word. So anyway, that was really the main subject I want to talk about today. It didn't really take very long, but it's sort of peeling back some of the realities of iTunes, and they still guard everything very closely. All the data they have, they will never share the number of subscribers you have with you. There are more analytics you can get on shows, like are people listening all the way through your show? Oh, Tracy's joining us. I'm gonna unmute her. Hey, Tracy. Oh, you probably unmuted yourself and then I muted you again. Let me unmute you again. Hey there.
Hey there.
You've jumped in when I'm just about at the end of talking to everybody about what I've been learning about iTunes in the last few weeks and things that have changed and new and noteworthy, and also the rankings within each different section. And I haven't opened it up to questions yet, but it's coming up fairly soon. Did you have anything you wanted to contribute to that conversation before I talk about some other things regarding Podetize that are changing in the next month?
Sorry about this, mood lighting I've got going on here. It makes me look like I'm going to a club here, but
don't worry about it. Let's stay focused though. Did you have anything to add to that?
So, I think the only thing that I want to add is that we have issues with different business models of it, and sometimes a new and notable model is necessary for your business to make money using podcasting. So I just kind of want to really set that out there, is that there are tons of ways to make money with your podcast or use your podcast within your business. But it doesn't have to be I have to be at the top of the list of everything. I mean, I get speaking engagements all over. I've just been offered one for October in Hong Kong, and I don't have a best-selling book. So every model doesn't require you to be on the top seller, the bestseller list.
That's a good point, Tracy.
I just want to kind of point that out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, as great as it is to be in the top 200 ranking your category on iTunes or to be a new and noteworthy, it's not the primary goal, I don't think, of any of us that are podcasting to achieve that. Would it be nice? Yes. Do we all want to get as much exposure as possible? Yes. Do we want to reach as many people as possible? Of course we do. But you're able to do that through podcasting, whether you're on those, high in those rankings or not, or if you're new and noteworthy or not. So that's a good point, Tracy. I'm just want to a couple of notes for those of you that are hosted on and or using our platform dashboard on Podetize in any way. Most of you are, a couple of you may not be yet. Is that we've been working on a redesign of that dashboard, not only for the appearance of it, which is kind of dated looking and could use a design refresh for sure, but also just from a user interface perspective. We've been taking in feedback from a lot of users and trying to make improvements to make things a little more intuitive and make it easier to find things, to navigate, to find your statistics. We had actually a do-it-yourself customer from San Diego who didn't even realize her statistics were there if she just scrolled further down the page. That was unfortunate, but now she certainly knows where to find that. But it brought up a good point, is that our dashboard needs to be very clear where you can find everything that you need to do what you need to do in an efficient manner. And So we've been taking in that feedback. So you will see some changes. They won't affect any of the functioning of your podcast publishing in any way. But it should be happening pretty early in the month of June. I don't think next week, but maybe the following week, if all goes well, and maybe it'll stretch out another week, but it's coming up pretty soon before our next client call. In the next client call, I might, while most of you should have seen it, I might actually give a little guided tour of some of that, especially for some of you newer podcasters, I guess. But in any case, so don't be surprised if you see some changes. And if you experience anything not working properly, let us know immediately, please. If you have my phone number, you can call me or text me. If not, you can just email hello@brandcastingu.com, or of course I'm at tom@brandcastingu.com, and Alexandra, most of you have one or a number of our emails. Reach out to us any which way. If you have any issues, we want to deal with it right away, but there should be no functional changes. Everything should be seamless in that regard. So I am, at this point, if anybody wants to put, you guys are either chat us or raise your hand, or any way you can reach out if you have a question, whether it's about iTunes and the subject we're talking about today, or anything else that you have a question you'd like to ask of me or Tracy today, we'd love to hear from you. So just type in the chat, let me know, and I'll unmute you so we don't have everybody unmuting at once. So rather short subject today. Sometimes we go into a longer, deeper dive, but really I just wanted to alert everyone because especially on iTunes, everyone keeps saying, IAB compliant question, Robert. Yeah, everybody keeps saying first 8 weeks is critical, and it's no longer critical. All right. Hi, Robert. Oh,
hey, how's it going?
Good. So IAB compliant question.
Yeah, I've been, we've been talking about my stats, because my stats were around 12,000 a month, with peaks of 800 to 1,000 a day. And then all of a sudden, in the end of April, it flattened to like 150 to 300 per day. And so I had a question about that. And then I posted it on this Facebook group, Podcast Movement Community for Podcasters, which is awesome, by the way. And someone wrote that it coincides with your host becoming IAB compliant, and a lot of people reported significant drops in their numbers after stricter policies went into place. I'm wondering if you have any more information about that.
Yeah, we've certainly read a lot about that. Libsyn went through a big change late last year, and I think by January or February, they had changed their entire stats system to be IAB compliant. We've researched and found ours is IAB compliant already. It's a standard amongst sort of the industry. It's highly technical. I couldn't even really tell you the details of everything that means. Do you know anything, Tracy?
A little bit more about it, yeah. So it's the difference between like measuring by impressions and what calculated as impressions way back when we were talking about, stats or how many views I had. And so it calculates basically saying that plays must be plays, whatever is considered plays or downloads. Those terms are used interchangeably, but someone must actually bring it into their device for that to count, or stream it and listen to it. So it is not a reflection, and it doesn't change anything in regards to being able to measure actual listeners. That has nothing to do with it. So it's really just doing exactly the same thing that everybody's been measuring for a long time, which is downloads technically, and not listens. So it hasn't changed any of that at all. I also think, though, that in Libsyn's case, it's actually a really big mistake for the shift that they've done. This is our personal viewpoint on this, but I think it's an old school advertising model that hits into what radio ads do. And so it doesn't play well with podcasts and the way podcasts are listened to, and the value of that catalog of your older episodes and people who binge listen. So it is following a very old school model and not rewarding the fact that you have an entirely amazing catalog or a podcast that has tons of great information, and people who find it go from the beginning and listen to the whole thing. And so it's like running, network television and using network television or Nielsen ratings instead of running and using Netflix owned stats, which make more sense and actually are highly valuable. And so that's why we don't really hold a lot of stock into it, but because we use an API integration to track those numbers on our own server, we're using an API that is IAB compliant already.
Yeah, and the stats data that we're pulling is directly from the servers that the podcast files are being served to iTunes, Google Play, and all those places from. So, because we're serving those files, if you're hosted with us, which you are, Robert,
Yeah.
then we know that in terms of the numbers of downloads you're getting like on a daily or weekly basis, those are accurate. And I agree. I noticed a drop at right about the same point in time as your show saw a drop in downloads in late April. Some of it was like a little bit before April 24th, and then April 24th for a lot of podcasters. And we've been wondering if this is coincidental. We've been trying to investigate it more and haven't quite drawn complete conclusions yet. But April 24th for a lot of listeners was a spike in downloads across a number of different podcasts. It's very strange. And then after April 24th, it seemed much lower. So we've seen that across a lot of podcasts, but not all of them. Not enough that we're seeing a complete trend across the board on everything that would indicate, all right, what changed system-wide? There hasn't been that kind of indicators yet.
And it was across podcasts hosted by multiple platforms.
Not just our platform too. Yeah. Other people that were on Libsyn before us, before working with us, have stayed on Libsyn. There's one of those people on this call today, and no reason to fix what isn't broken. You're happy with Libsyn, may as well have it stay hosted there if you're not going to take ads or anything. So we've noticed with a lot of Libsyn customers, because we have about half a dozen or more, that there was, when this IB compliant thing shifted from, I forget what month it was like February to March or something this year, all of a sudden all Libsyn podcasts, their stats went way, way down in terms of the number of downloads being reported. And that was pretty consistent across all Libsyn customers.
Stayed down except for the April 24th spike.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know what happened in this entire industry on April 24th, but across the board, it's like everybody's downloads went way up that day. I'm not convinced it's genuine just because it's so many different people had that spike on that day. It's very strange. And in your case, Robert, I know there is an issue. We're still checking on the back end because when we migrated you had historical statistics that were added to the total counts, and unfortunately, with the run up to Memorial Day this weekend, some of the technical people have not been as available as usual, and I may not have answers for you now till next week on that, but I'm just trying to confirm and make sure all those baseline plays are accurately being added to the totals, because I know you saw a big drop in the total number. That may have something to do with it, but also the fact that we moved, I think, a dozen of your shows to their own new feeds, and those stats would have moved with those episodes and decreased from your total, but not enough to make the total drop you've seen. So
yeah, I lost like 80,000, so I don't think the new shows.
Yeah, I agree. So we're checking into that. In terms of the plays in general on a regular basis, we're obviously checking our systems and making sure that they're accurate, which so far we believe they absolutely are. But we've seen a number of different podcasts across the board in that April to May timeframe, plays go way down, and have not identified any common reason for that. So
okay. Please let me know.
We certainly will if we hear anything. I mean, one thing that we know is your subscribers that you have, who are your regular listeners, whether they're from iTunes or Stitcher or anywhere else, are still subscribed to your podcast. I mean, unless they just decided not to subscribe and they actually unsubscribed, I'm sure they're still there and still listening. So
that could be the anomaly. Actually, that's worth checking, because some of our podcasters have higher iTunes subscriptions than others. And so what happens is that iTunes and Stitcher and some of them have been putting in app changes, and those app changes change the way that normal subscriptions happen. So in other words, they're the default change to not downloading instead of downloading. And they may have had an alteration on April 24th where like all of a sudden everything was downloading and everyone flipped out because it probably used too much power on their phone. So this is all power play with the phones. So using up too much battery space and the downloads happening is that. So many of those apps, they're controlled by the phone manufacturer, iPhone in this case, they switched that worked. And then people who really listened to your podcast had to go back in and re-download and purposefully resubscribe again in a way, reset their settings.
Yeah, your signal's really hurting, Tracy. So I'm gonna, thanks for muting yourself when you're not there.
Yeah.
You know,
I gotta run to another call too. So thank you for.
Okay, Dan. Okay, Robert. Thank you. One other thing I want to mention regarding iTunes, there was Tracy's right there. She was talking about some different changes, but there was one big fundamental change made with the Apple Podcasts app and on iTunes, and that is when you subscribed to their app, if you, as a listener who just listens to podcasts, if you had a period of time where you were just so busy and you didn't get around to listening to certain podcasts, then the Apple Podcast app would stop automatically downloading it to your phone. And when that happened, when it was with iOS 11 update, I think it was October and November. And when that happened, all of a sudden, people who hadn't actually listened to a podcast in a long time, but you were getting downloads from them, it was really probably a false download. People weren't really listening, even though they were subscribed. They're getting every new episode, and iOS 11 comes out, and if you, as a listener, hadn't listened in 2 weeks, it stopped downloading them automatically. When you go into your app, you could say, all right, I you know what, I do want those. I'm still subscribed. I still want to get them downloaded. You could force it to download, so you could still get everything. But anyway, that happened. So certain changes like that certainly can affect your downloads. Tracy was right. She's talking about some other apps, but that one with iTunes was significant. Okay. Any other questions from the group? No one else has typed anything into chat since Robert did. We've got, let's see, still a few people on. Deanna always has a question. Not today, I guess, though. John Livesey hasn't been on with us often. It's great to have him. How are you, John?
I'm good. Those are great.
What's new in your podcasting world?
I just did a TV show called Good Morning La La Land, and they wanted to hear about the book and the podcast and how to use the podcast to grow your business for people who are watching the show. It targets women. And so, I talk about, conquering the 3 faces of fear that I do in my keynotes, and how it's important to get someone to help you and not go it alone, and all that good stuff.
That's great. That's great. You are really out there. You're always getting on TV shows, it seems, in different places. But it's interesting to see what they're interested in. They want to know about the podcast. You're finding people are asking more about it, and podcast is still, it seems to be.
Well, one of the hosts there's 3 hosts of this show, and she had started a podcast, and I had given her some advice that you had given me a long time ago, which is, it's not about how many downloads you get. It's about building your network and the quality of those relationships you build with the guests. So she actually opened the segment with that. I'm like, oh, we're going there. Here we go. All right, let's go on the ride. But that wasn't how I pitched myself to get on, but it became a topic, which was great. And, when I give a keynote and all that stuff, it's a big part of the authority and the credibility. Being an author, being a podcast host, and how many countries your podcast is heard in all creates that buzz. And my TEDx talk that I worked 1.5 years on getting, I literally had to walk my own talk of not taking rejection personally. I applied to over 15 different places. They have thousands of people for a very limited number of slots. And so that'll come out in 2 weeks. So then that becomes a whole nother strategy of how do you get the views on your TEDx talk, for social proof, blah, 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 putting it into all the, show notes going forward. That be the core video as opposed to a TV segment that we have now. It'll be a fascinating case study, I think, because then you guys could start approaching all the people who've given TEDx talks that might be wanting to do a podcast who need views and say, here's the case study of how to use a podcast to get people to watch your TEDx talk. It could be an interesting
Yeah, well, I think you should be talking about if you're a little different because you record your episodes so far ahead. You're like 6 months ahead at least.
Yeah.
And for those of you
August
podcasters
anyway
out there wondering about this, my gosh, John's recorded everything at least through August, if not beyond. And so now you have the TEDx talk, and you want to promote that. So how are you going to promote that in your current episodes? Well, I think you could promote that obviously in your audio show. You could perhaps change the intro to your show if you wanted to, or run an audio promotion within your shows about your TEDx talk and utilize that certainly as a way to get the word out about that. That'd be great.
Great.
And
well, it'll come out in 2 weeks, so we'll brainstorm on what new recordings I might want to swap out.
Awesome.
To put in there. But obviously just putting that in the show notes as a link for every episode going forward, even if it's recorded 3 months ago, and then swapping out the TV clip that we're using now. But I think that's going to be a big hook, because there's a lot of people that are wanting to be keynote speakers and don't know how to do it, or maybe they have a podcast, maybe they don't, maybe they have a TEDx talk. But if you start lining all these things up, podcast turns into a book, turns into getting on TV, turns into a TEDx talk, then we have a formula that can help a lot of other keynote speakers go, oh, I need to use that.
And you have a platform, an authority platform, right, John?
Yeah. Exactly, Casey. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. You are definitely a prime example, John, of using all those different facets of it, having turned a bunch of your episodes into a book, and then having used it as a stepping stone to being a speaker, and then a paid speaker, and now the TEDx talk. My gosh, you're the shining example for sure.
And just, to share with everybody, the ecosystem of getting your startup funded was where I was interviewing a lot of investors for those relationships. Now it's shifted to interviewing a lot of potential speaking agents who might want to represent me, and having them be on the podcast. And they're so flattered because they're behind the scenes all the time. And it helped me get a speaking agent in Hong Kong by having her episode. Priscilla Chan, you might remember. And then, of course, then I go, oh, and she hasn't booked me quite yet, but I keep in front of her by going, oh, I was just on TV, here's a clip. And then 2 weeks later, here's my TEDx talk. So you're not bugging your agent, but you're constantly showing them why you're relevant. And that's really what agents and event planners are looking for is, are you staying current? Are you producing content that keeps you relevant to the audience?
Fantastic. That's a great point, John. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And it is, I think you do, there is while there's tremendous value in your back catalog and episodes that you've done, especially if they're evergreen topics, staying relevant and continuing to produce current episodes is still very, very important. And it is certainly helping fuel your websites with, Google keyword rankings. We experienced this last month. I think we talked about it in last month, or it was after last month's client call, wasn't it, Tracy?
It was right after, like immediately following.
All right, I totally forgot about this. So this is going to be a good little story. We experienced the power of a podcast and a blog post. It was April 27th. It was last month's client call. As we're on the client call like this, Alexandra over to the side is like, raising her hands and like shocked and all this stuff. There was stuff happening, and Tracy and I are trying to pay attention to what we're doing here. And what she found is we had a Feed Your Brand podcast episode that published that morning. And it published at 3 a.m. Pacific time, 6 a.m. Eastern, so commuters would have it on their phones if they're subscribers. And the blog post was published at the same time. Well, we got an email during the client call, or Alexandra did, to our general email for the show, from the CEO of Blueberry, who is another podcast host, and they make PowerPress, the plugin that some of you either may have used in the past or may still be using to a certain extent. And he was not happy. I should have led with this story. I totally forgot. I thought we covered it last month, but he was not happy because he thought we were trashing their software in our episode, which we did not. So the first indicator when I was reading his email was, did he read the blog post? Did he listen to the episode? I think actually he had an assistant who probably got a Google alert because of keywords that led them to our episode and our blog post. And he thought we were you know, what we had said in our episode was inaccurate, I guess, about their plugin. And in fact, we were quite complimentary about their plugin. This episode was about podcast websites, and we were actually talking about the different platforms you could build your website on. WordPress, Wix, Squarespace is becoming pretty popular, and things like that. And we were saying, from our experience, WordPress is the best platform, and PowerPress was mentioned in context with that. But we actually said it's a fine plugin. It's not our favorite, but there's certainly nothing wrong with it, and it does certain things very well. Well, anyway, this ended up into this huge thing. We're like, how did they find out about this episode so quick? Because were they subscribers? Well, it turns out it was a Google alert. And when Alexandra then, as this all unfolded, types in 3 different keyword phrases into Google, and this is all of 11 hours after the blog post was published. She typed in podcast websites, best podcast websites, and worst podcast websites. These are, and the keyword phrase our blog post, we optimized it for, which you can only optimize it for one keyword phrase, was just generally podcast websites. Well, but on all 3 of those keyword terms, our blog post was coming up on the very first page of Google search that day. So 11 hours after the post was put up. We didn't know that was going to happen. We've never seen that quick of a response. We've seen it with other clients' posts within 2 to 3 days. It ends up on the first page of Google search for certain search terms, but we'd never seen it happen that fast. So if you Googled best podcast websites, worst podcast websites, or just podcast websites, the post was either right at the top, number 1 or number 4, and I think one of them was number 7, but it was all on the first page of Google. So that is the power and the value, a great case study in the power of what your podcast and your blog post can do in terms of, I mean, look, we got the attention, good, bad, or indifferent, of the CEO of Blueberry, which is a pretty big corporation that, makes this WordPress plugin that's on like 85,000 websites or something like that. And so it got the word out. So, we got another.
I just wanted to share, getting the word out. Is anyone listening to your podcast that could become a client and hire you? Here's a recent case study. He consistently produced content. This guy started listening to my podcast, and I posted in the chat what he wrote me. And
very cool.
He's actually using the metaphor I use in the commercial about how I help people, like getting across the river. And he's hired me already from listening to the podcast. So I'm like, oh, it's working, Tracy. It's working. There's a funnel happening.
Oh, definitely. And we hear this really from most of our podcast clients in one way or another. Everybody measures success a different way. Scott Carson has literally had hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in his into notes, which are real estate notes, with him from listeners of the podcast who did not know him any other way. They had not met him prior. And then we've had others like a chiropractor in New Jersey. You think, well, this is a local business. How is a podcast that's worldwide going to help it? Well, in the first 90 days, he got 12 new patients just from people who listened to the podcast. He did have a worldwide audience and was getting questions internationally that he was happy to answer. But even in his local practice, got 12 new patients who, the lifetime value of a patient for him is significant. So it was definitely more than paying for what he was doing with the podcast. And he continues to pour more fuel on it. Now he's getting into marketing products for his business and his podcast name and selling those over his website and on Amazon, sort of expanding that into physical product, which is neat.
And I just wanted to throw out one more thing because of who you guys are and how great you are. When you get big brands like Coca-Cola to pick you versus all the other people they could hire, including their own internal production company, I think it speaks volumes to everyone who's lucky enough to be part of your network.
Thank you.
Quality's there, the show notes, everything. I just keep getting rave reviews. That really, if a big brand like Coca-Cola, which I think last time I checked does $5 billion in revenue, is using you to produce their podcast, to create their relationships with the CMOs that sell Pepsi at their fast food restaurants and hotel chains, as opposed to sell Coca-Cola instead of Pepsi. So the podcast becomes another tool when they're out there selling to, a restaurant or whatever the fast food chain is, saying, one of the perks from selling Coke versus Pepsi is you could be on our podcast and we give you exposure as to what your branding strategy is. So, I mean, even at a big level like that, and then who do they pick to use you? I mean, it's just fantastic that you have the quality and the value of what you're offering that allows Coca-Cola to justify internally. You can imagine how many hoops that was to jump through. We're not using the internal people.
Yeah.
Tom and Tracy.
Well, thank you, John. Appreciate that.
Sorry, the ones that surprise me the most are the entertainment companies or magazine companies that use us. So we do Popular Mechanics and I think O is now.
Oh, the Oprah magazine is coming online soon.
So, yeah. And so I always think of them as like, I mean, these are companies that are doing digital content, right? They're doing lots of blogs. They're doing all of that. And yet they still want to outsource to us. I have to say that one was more surprising to me over the last year that we've grown in those publications. But it's really because it's just a whole different world for them. Podcast is a whole different world. And they recognize that being an expert in that particular category is a benefit to them. And so it has to be treated differently. I write, as you know, John, and pretty much everybody on here, I write for a publication. And we do these podcasts. And I have to say, sometimes I cringe at our blog posts because they're so wordy and they're all of these things. But the reality is that you can't argue with the power of them and the combination of doing both. And they recognize that. They don't want the editorial staff to be handling those kinds of things and upset about it, because they will. So I'm going to have to jump off because I've got 15 minutes before I have to be in front of a whole group for a mastermind. But if you guys have any questions for me, Alexandra, Tom will feed them. I'll either record a quick video answer if it's specifically for me, or I'll email you back. So thanks, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, Tracy. Have a good mastermind. John is still. So John and Dan and Deborah are on here. Now, Deborah, you're very new. I don't know if you had any questions, but, otherwise we'll, if nobody else has any questions, we'll start to wrap it up here. And just listening. Okay, Deborah, that's great. I'm glad you joined. Thank you for coming. Sometimes it's a longer subject and a deeper dive. Sometimes it's a short subject and a lot of discussion. And I want to thank you all for participating. John, especially for coming on and sharing your story and obviously giving your endorsement. I do appreciate that.
Sure, my pleasure. Have a great holiday weekend, everybody.
Yes, everybody have a great Memorial Day. Thanks so much. Bye.